On November 4th, this past November 4th, the world experienced not just the national election in the United States, but a global phenomenon, a global event. It was the election of Barack Obama, the first African-American president of the United States. Ali Masri, professor at Binghamton University, Pan-Africanist thinker, said not only the first African-American president of the United States, but the first black leader of the Western world. And he said, what will this mean? Will there be a black prime minister of England, a black president of France? Will it mean a black chancellor of Germany? He said, that's least likely of all. But it was so significant. As I was traveling in Europe around that time, people were paying more attention to the elections in the United States than they were to their own elections or their own politics. It was so significant. Yes, it was historic. And when we saw the Obama family walk into the White House, Barack Obama himself, son of a black Kenyan man, a white woman from Kansas, he's born in Hawaii. He grows up partly in Indonesia, is raised by his maternal grandparents, then in Hawaii, goes to Occidental in California, to Columbia, where he graduates, becomes a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, then becomes the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review, then goes back to community organizing. Imagine parents will be saying to their children now, maybe you can be a community organizer too. Now, we know that the Gradys have been telling their children that for a long time, but now they become mainstream. Imagine, maybe you can become president of the United States if you're a community organizer. I mean, a new model of what it means to be an active citizen, an admirable citizen, a patriot in this country. Yes, the paradigms are shifting. There's no question about it. And to see the Obamas walk into the White House, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama, her grandfather from South Carolina, came up in the Great Migration North and settled in Chicago. She, a descendant of slaves, which makes their children, Malia and Sasha, descendants of slaves, going in to live in the White House, the most famous house on earth, built by slaves. Remarkable. Can President Obama redeem the White House? Well, really, it is not just up to him. Which makes me think about another house not far from there in the eastern shore of Maryland. Well, makes me think as we talk about movements of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, born in the eastern shore of Maryland, the most famous abolitionist in US history. He was enslaved as a youth and a teenager. It might not surprise you to know he was a troublemaking slave. And so he was handed over to a slave breaker, a man named Edwin Covey, to break him. He was in St. Michael's, and Edwin Covey's property was known as Mount Misery. He tortured Frederick Douglass, he beat him, but Frederick Douglass broke away, ultimately headed north, ultimately to this area. And I was just speaking in Geneva, and a person came up to me afterwards, a young woman said, do you want to come with me tomorrow morning before you go to the airport? It was in the middle of a big snowstorm, to Mount Hope Cemetery, where Frederick Douglass is buried. And we went at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I saw his grave. And then I said, I'm going to miss my plane. She said, no, you got to come with me across the cemetery. And so we trudged through the snow, and then we started running. And there she showed me the grave of Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass's close friend. And I thought about the movements that have shaped this country. And then I went to the airport and missed my plane. It didn't matter that one wing of the airport actually is named Susan B. Anthony Airport, and the other wing is the Frederick Douglass wing of the airport. It didn't help when I begged to get on the plane and talked about being at the cemetery. None of the workers helped me there, but it was so inspiring. Now, that property where Frederick Douglass was tortured, Mount Misery, is owned by Donald Rumsfeld. He bought it in 2003 as his vacation home. to be next to his close friend, Vice President Dick Cheney, who also vacations there. And after I learned this, I told the story a lot everywhere I went. And, I did research on it. It did seem to be true, not just web lore, but I thought, I'm a journalist. I really better go and look at this, check this out with my own eyes. So I headed to St. Michael's with Dennis Moynihan, who's organized this tour and is so important for democracy now. And we drove to St. Michael's. We didn't know where to find the Secretary of Defense's home, but I saw an organic coffee shop. I thought they'll tell us the truth. So they said, you go out back, you have a car, right? I said, yes. And he said, you drive back, and there's Mount Pleasant Road. Don't go down that road. And you make a left, and then you make a right on Mount Misery Road, and he's at the end of the road. So we followed the directions, did not go down Mount Pleasant, and we went down Mount Misery Road. There we could see the black tinted windows of the black SUV, knew it was the Secret Service. We had arrived, and so I got my little video camera and got outside, and I started filming. And as the Secret Service was coming, and I knew it was a matter of seconds before my camera would be taken away, I just zoomed in on a little plaque I saw next to the driveway. And as I zoomed in, I could see the words clearly, in case you had any doubt over whether Donald Rumsfeld knows the history of his property. Right there in a stake in the ground, it says Mount Misery. So then we headed over to the local black church, an ancient black church right there in St. Michael's. It was Sunday morning. Folks were just about to have Mass. They were having Sunday school, and the older folks were sitting in the sanctuary. I went up to a woman and I asked her, what do you think? About Frederick Douglass being imprisoned here, being a slave here on the property at Mount Misery, and she's nodding her head, that is now owned by Donald Rumsfeld. She said, I can't comment right now, we're in church.